So Ken, tell us about your mobile commerce evangelism. Tell us about that.
Okay. I think you have heard the name. It's Ken Njoroge. So I've been doing what I do for about 19 years. So I've been an entrepreneur for 19 years. First started a company in the web industry. We built one of the early web development firms in the region. Sometime a couple of years ago, actually started in 98. I was 23 then, I'm a young guy. We ran that for 5 years and we sold that to Africa Online, who was the largest ISP at the time. And then mobile, it was very early days of mobile, so it felt interesting to look at the mobile space. So I've been in mobile forever, and so I guess the mobile in mobile commerce evangelist is there. Commerce, I always thought that if Africa was going to digitize on the back of mobile platform, you could generally say that in much the way the internet revolutionized a lot of industries everywhere it went, that the same would happen in Africa. And an evangelist is kind of generally been a timeless title for me because I'm always sort of preaching about the vision of the business, why we do what we do, why I do what I do, and so on. I think my conversations are usually generally about that. So it's kind of, and then I'm not too much of a social media guy, so I haven't updated my LinkedIn profile. So when it got set up, I called myself a mobile commerce evangelist, and that's just generally been what it is.
Amazing. Some fun facts about Ken. 11 locations, 34 countries served, 300 plus employees, 120 plus banks, 40 plus mobile networks, 21 plus mobile wallets, 600 plus e-commerce merchants, and 120 million consumers in Africa. All this is the wonderful work being done by Cellulant. So, Ken, what is Cellulant? Is it a proverb, a noun, a verb? And why that name?
Okay, so Cellulant is actually, it's a name of the company, but Cellulant is actually an attitude. I always say that it's an attitude. What's that attitude? It's a attitude that's really focused on Africa. When we started the business many years ago, we spent a lot of time complaining about a couple of things. We complained around just Africa itself, why the roads were the same, why electricity wasn't working. My co-founder is Nigerian, so we complained a lot about Kenya and Nigeria and the same stuff. We complained about Africans in general. We complained about the state of the continent and so on. And eventually we came to a conclusion saying, look, everywhere in the world you see Africans doing great things, but just never in their own continent, right? And so at some point we said, okay, fine, we keep complaining about it, but what are we going to do about it? So we actually then decided, look, I think we're kind of entrepreneurs. Could then these Africans sort of build a business in Africa that was Pan-African, that was a world-class business, a master in its leader, without the baggage that you typically saw with large African businesses at the time, businesses that were not founded on political patronage, businesses that were started by two regular guys from regular backgrounds, and businesses that weren't built on corruption, right? So we wanted to build a business that never paid a single cent in bribe. We figured, okay, so for it to be world-class, it has to be innovative. It needed to be in technology because, technology was a knowledge-based business. And then it needed to be really large. So, and we thought, $1 billion, that sounds like a good number to build a business. And then we sketched this on a serviette, and we foolishly went out to start this business. We thought that we'd get to $1 billion by 2014. It now looks like we'll do this by 2023. I think we have a very credible chance of getting there. So it took longer than we thought it would. But it's generally been very interesting journey. And then we almost died, like the business almost died, but we also physically almost died in the process of doing this thing. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that journey.
Indeed. And, you have a Nigerian co-founder. That's brave for a Kenyan, doing business with Nigeria. The first thing when a Nigerian tells you, come, we open a business, most people are like, did you just say that? So what encouraged you to work with the founder or rather a co-founder, who was not Kenyan, so it was out of your comfort zone, one, and two, from a different region that probably maybe you hadn't worked in before or understood the dynamics of working in. So what gave you comfort to work with your co-founder, and where did you guys meet? How did this all happen?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question. So I met Bolaji sometime, I think it must have been 2001, I think it was. And Bolaji, like most things in business, they are never scripted. They just happen. And actually, if you ask me, how did I meet Bolaji, it's just as difficult as how I met my wife. I met Bolaji, and it was actually, Bolaji met me before I met him. So what had happened, he used to work for P&G in Ghana. And then so he had relocated to Nairobi to run strategy for a World Bank project. They had a project called the African Virtual University at the time. And so somebody who came from his network had wanted to put a couple of young guys who are doing interesting things, because he had some ideas that he wanted to run by us. And so we happened to be in the dinner, and there was all kinds of people, noisy, lots of stuff. And there was this one quiet guy who sort of was observing the conversation and so on. And then somebody asked him about Nigeria. And I always replay this story. I listened to him explain Nigeria, explain technology in Nigeria, telecom stuff, and just said, wow, that guy is super smart. And so at the end of the dinner table, I just stretched across the table and said, can I have your business card? And he gave me his business card. I went, and it's like most things, you put them in the desk, and then work gets, you get overtaken by work. Then I think a couple of months later, I was clearing my desk. I saw his card. I said, man, I never stayed in touch with this guy. So I dropped him an email. Happened to have been, had his office a couple of meters from where we were. And he says, well, let me come by your desk in the evening and let's chat. And so he came by, and we started chatting. And then we chatted for 3-4 hours every single day, bitching about Africa and so on and so forth. And one day we had an opportunity to present to an operator in Uganda. And I called Bolaji and I said, okay, Bolaji, we've been talking about all this stuff. We have an opportunity to go and meet a CEO, CTO, Chief Marketing Officer of an operator in Uganda. Can we go? And Bolaji, without hesitation, just said, sure, man. And he says, can I buy the ticket? And he bought a ticket, didn't ask me for a single cent, and we got on the plane and went. And it was a very interesting experience, because the next morning, as we were preparing to go to the pitch, I had a shirt my mom had bought me, and it didn't have buttons, right? So when I looked at, so Bolaji told me, yeah, that shirt requires cufflinks. I'll give you some. He gave me cufflinks, showed me how to wear them. And then he was wearing a cream suit. I always never forget this story. I just said, okay, so this guy is Nigerian. I mean, who on earth wears a cream suit to a business meeting? But the attitude on the guy, Well, I said, well, fine, maybe he knows about cufflinks. Maybe it's actually posh to wear a cream suit and stuff like that. Anyway, so we went into this thing. We delivered a pitch. At the end of the pitch, the guy said, okay, great, when do we start? And so when we walked out of the meeting, we said, oh, you know what? Actually, this Cellulant was just always on a name on a serviette. It wasn't a company set up and stuff. So we went around Uganda. How long does it take to set up a company? It was like 6 months, 8 months. Checked in Kenya, it was another 6 months, 8 months. And then we were depressed for a couple of days. And then one day we asked ourselves, hang on, how long does it take to set up a company in the UK? And it took a day. And then we said, so well, let's set up a business in the UK. So Cellulant actually got incorporated as a company in the UK, completely by expediency. And then after that, it became a cool story. It's like we are a UK-based company doing business in Uganda and Ghana. And it was always a nice story. It got you through to meetings, right? So, and that's how Cellulant was born.
Amazing. So the moral of the story, please hook up with a Nigerian. Set up your company in the UK.
My family, by the way, was terrified. So my uncle, you know, when I was transitioning from 3 miles into Cellulant, you know, so one day my uncle, my mom's elder brother, called me, and he never said a thing to me. So he gave me a magazine. It was a magazine article of some Nigerians that had ripped off a Brazilian bank of like $250 million or something of that sort. So he just gave me the article, never said something, just expected me to read and see the light. But well, you know. By the way, Bolaji ended up being my best man in my wedding. So we became a very good friend. Bought a lot of diapers for my early son because he had a job, I was the entrepreneur, sort of bootstrapping the business and stuff like that. So we're very good pals.
Amazing, amazing. And when you look at the journey of building Cellulant, so after the napkin, after setting up in, in the UK, what got you off your feet? Initial sources of funding, people always say family, friends, and the other one, fools. So, what really got you going other than bootstrapping? Who else had the faith to actually give you funding? Because at some point, your funds can only do too much.
Yeah, I think it's in the early years it was very interesting because so the story goes that so we built a web development firm, sold it. Off the top of your mind you think that we made some money. Actually, we never made any money in that sale, and that's when I got my first MBA in business, right? Because we structured when we basically sold 3 miles to Africa Online. What effectively we did is we got into a deal that we effectively gave away 95% of our company in return for a debt, $500,000 debt at the time. And then if we basically, I think in the preceding years grew 4 times and continued to grow at a certain rate, got 25% back into the company, right? So by the time that we actually exited 3 miles, basically there was just nothing. There was actually no money, but actually was in debt as a young entrepreneur. So when we went and was sketching this stuff in Cellulant, sketching the vision and mission of Cellulant on a serviette, I had zero money, had a debt thingy hanging at the back of my head. Bolaji had a job. I was freshly married, got my firstborn son in our first year. Bolaji was also freshly married, moved his wife from Ghana to Kenya. And that's the state of things where we were. So in getting some of the early stuff done, basically Bolaji had we essentially just leveraged Bolaji's salary and his card. Now in those days, cards were not always, all card machines were not always online all the time. So we knew all of the joints where cards would work offline. So we knew there was one petrol station in Dennis Street, there was one Uchumi in one street, and so on and so forth. And so typically this is how we manage, because you imagine, on day one of starting the business, you go in, you got, like in Uganda, we had this contract, so you need to service that, you need to buy some software, you needed to hire an engineer, you needed to get him a laptop and stuff like that. So essentially we scrapped here and there, trying to get these things going. So the first sort of things were financed off Bolaji's credit card. And then at some point it just became unsustainable to do that. It just didn't make sense. And then we started to so for me, I started to leverage every line of credit we could get. From staff, from suppliers, from landlords at home, from my staff's landlord. Those were the people, I would say those were the first angel investors in Cellulant. Now, how does that work from a practical point of view? It's very simple. I always knew that if you wanted to build $1 billion business, you needed to work with really good quality people. That's just it. You needed to work with good quality suppliers. And so in my mind, at least in my construct at that time, I always said I will not take a second best. I'll go for the best guy I can hire. And my discussion was always very simple. I just tell him, hey, I want the best. I think you're the best supplier, you're the best staff. You know what? We are going to be your largest customer. in 2 years, 3 years. You got to take a leap of faith now. We can't afford you now. We can't tell you when we're going to pay you. But we want your service, and we are going to be super demanding. Now, what I found is that, you talk to 10 guys, 8 of them thought you were just absolutely out of your mind. Another 2 actually were just as crazy as you are. And they took a leap of faith, right? And so suppliers took a leap of faith. Landlords, my personal landlords, took a leap of faith. Some of our early staff members, and it's like our current CTO, took a leap of faith. And essentially what happens is this funded the business in the early years. And then to keep that ecosystem going, what I found is that always being very upfront, being very frank, being clear-minded about what was possible, what wasn't possible, always made it easier for people to choose. So there's some of these stupid things that Kenyans do, right? You don't answer people's calls, you don't, whatever it is, you don't tell people what's going on. And so, all of that stuff, by just being forthright, being clear-minded, and telling people, sorry, boss, I'm not going to pay you a dime for another year. And people would get shocked. But at some point, they become, people would appreciate actually that you're giving them a sense of what is going to happen. And also this sharing even internally with the teams, it became everybody's problem, right? And I found that actually by sharing out the problems, by being open and that sort of thing, people brought their A game to the table. So in the early years, we'd run around 3 months, 4 months, no salaries. But then I'd still push people very hard to deliver, because I said, look, the only way that we get there is by doing things faster than everybody else, better than everybody else, much more disciplined than everybody else, much more resilient, and so on. And so this got us through, I would say the first 3 years was horrible years of near-death experiences. Basically, every single day, there was always a threat that would kill the business. So typically, I came to work every morning and to solve a problem, right? One problem, maybe it was Faisal's landlord that needed us. So I tell Faisal, you just focus on work, I'll go and talk to the guy. And go and sit with the landlord and just tell him, okay, Faisal's a nice guy, stop hustling him. And actually, it's not his problem, I'm the problem, right? And I said, now, you know what? If you stress the guy, he doesn't deliver. If he doesn't deliver, we don't get paid. I don't get paid. He doesn't get paid. He doesn't get paid. You don't get paid. So this is a shared problem. Let's focus, right? And so that's it. So I would say that in the first 3 years, 70%, 80% of my time got spent really financing the business in this way. So just negotiating capital lines, keeping people motivated, balancing the dance between pushing guys to deliver and on the other side, just telling them, sorry guys, for another 2 months, no more salary still, right? This kind of stuff. And then after that, then we basically started to have a little bit of predictability as to where revenues were coming from. We had a product in the market. We started off as a music business. So we had some predictability about what the business model was, and so I went to the bank. And when I went to the bank, so same story, okay, do you have security? Okay, we don't finance businesses in the IT sector. We can't give you a loan without security and whatever it is. So I'd go and think hard about that and say, okay, so what do they mean security? And I'll basically figure out, okay, you want something that you can hold to, and I'd figure out a way to collateral invoices. I'd go back and say, well, I've got security. I've got these invoices from a mobile operator. Could you lend against this and stuff like that? And then I just wore them down. I think one of the banks that eventually gave us a line and continued to lend us into the first phase of our growth. I basically went to the bank every day for 3 weeks. I was just like every day. I'd carry a magazine. I'd meet the reception, say hi. Don't feel bad, by the way, that the boss doesn't want to see me. It's not your problem. I know it. So we sit down, and I just don't get angry because, look, I mean, there's no obligation that he has to see me, right? And I did this for 3 weeks. One day, the guy just looked at me and just said, come. And he didn't even look at me. he just called somebody and said, what does this guy want? I don't want to see him again. Sort him out. I don't want ever to see him again. I said, well, I also don't want to see you again. This is fine. We'll sort it out. And so that's the thing. So the first few years were just grit. And then we moved to the bank and we wore them down. And essentially then they started to support us. And we were bank funded up until 2011. So 2004 we went to market. 2004, 2005, 2006 was funded by sweat, really, employee sweat, supplier sweat, family sweat, everything. My mother, Bolaji's were everyone. There's basically every single center we could lay our hands on, we did, right? And then we moved to the bank, and then 2011 we basically got our first private equity institutional investor. It was about $1.5 million.
Maybe just pause right there and let's think a little bit about this journey. It's been hard, it's been funded by leverage. You know, he's had to borrow from suppliers, from lenders, from, you know, all sorts of people. And yet you're still here, you know, talking to suppliers and telling them, I won't pay you, but look, I don't have the money now, but eventually I'll make good. I think those are really key, you know, characteristics that entrepreneurs need to embody. And as we can see, Ken, you actually did not have a main hustle and a side hustle, because that's something Kenyans do well, you know. They have their main job and their side hustle. So your hustle was your hustle. I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs or people mistake entrepreneurship and say, okay, I have my day job, and then when things in my side hustle pick up, I will, you know, shift over and go. So what gave you that confidence to actually go straight into entrepreneurship, given the type of education background that you had? You know, you're locally educated, did your MBA, so you'd have been very ripe for, you know, any top job in a bank or, you know, any financial institution, but yet you chose that path of hard work, grit, you know, and consistency. So I think there's something there about, you know, entrepreneurship that I think you are able to really see right from the beginning and go, you know, and really go and not look back. So what is this that you saw instead of going and looking for a job? You decided to branch into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's a good question, and a question that I have very strong opinions on, and nobody should get offended, right? So Kenyans, yes, they've got the main hustle and side hustle. I think it's stupid. You know, yeah, because what happens is this. So let's be practical about it. So let's assume that you work for a bank. And so this side hustle, main hustle, how does it operate? It says that, okay, so 8 to 5 I work at the bank, and then I go and do 2 hours, and let's say maybe I'm growing potatoes. So when are you going to be a master of any one of those, right? I mean, because the business takes a lot of time, takes a lot of grit, requires a lot of, let me say, what I call proprietary insights. You know, what is it that because there's nothing, we don't build rockets to the moon. Every single thing that we do, we have 10 people that can do the same stuff, right? Even Cellulant, which is at least supposedly a sort of high-tech leader. Every single thing that we do every day, there's a competitor somewhere who can do it better, faster than we can do it. So what is it that makes a difference? What makes a difference is that for the last 15 years, we have seen through and solved every potential problem that can kill us. That's the difference. And then we've done that from early morning to midnight to 3 o'clock and so on. And we've been doing that for a while. So in the end, we just have because we have applied ourselves for very long, we just have a higher chance of succeeding than the other guy. That's just it. And so this side hustle, whatever it is and things like that, is false. It's just so ideally you're denying a business or passion, whatever it is, the best of you. And on day one, when you start a business, you are the only asset that the business has, right? It will fail, it will move forward, it will succeed only by you on day one. And so it just doesn't mean that, it doesn't seem to make sense to me that then from day one, you only give our business 20%, 10% of your time. Sooner or later, whatever business it is in, If it's in agriculture, the rains and the floods will kill your business. The weevils will kill your business. If you are in financial service, the exchange rate will take you out. Sooner or later, something else is going to sort you out because you're not committing enough time to figure out how to last into the future. Now, in my case, so that's one part. I've got a strong opinion around. I just say, well, choose, right? And there's a good business case in being a really good employee, right? There's no shame at all in really being good at what you do, and you rise to the top. And you've seen CEO salaries in this country; they're not bad, right? It's like they're not bad. I mean, as I've seen a bank CEO, and CEO who earns 10 million bob a month. So if you are to build a business of that size to take that in profit, you need to build what size of business? You need to build almost $10 million business. There are very few $10 million businesses in Kenya. So if you're a really good guy, you can rise to be CEO by 37, by 40. It'll be a really good life. So focus. So if you decide whether you want to work, and if you work, then go and be the CEO. And then if you want to run a business, then go out and run a successful business because it's bloody hard. So that I've got a strong opinion. It's my opinion. Take it or leave it. That's just what I think. I think in terms of my personal choice, why did I do that? I think by orientation, I was kind of destined to be an entrepreneur. So when I meet people who know me from when I was in high school, I tell them what they do. They're like, yeah, okay, we are not surprised. So that gets me curious. So it's most probably possible that I started to rebel very early, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, I always get a sense that I was almost cast into this journey. Why did I decide to do it young? Because I felt that, when you're young, you're resilient enough to bounce back, right? I always figured. So I quit pharmacy school very early, started the business early, because I always felt that, look, if it didn't work, if it turned out that actually, oh my God, 4 years later, I wanted to be a pharmacist. At 24, I'd still go out and be a pharmacist. But later, actually, on business experience, I've come to figure that it helps a lot, actually, when you start young, because people will forgive you for being young. So if I wanted to start Cellulant at 40, so I'm 43 now, I think most people would be figuring out, okay, so you're 43 now, and so if your ideas were good, why have they not worked already? And that's a problem. But when I was 23, so people would think about, they're like, is this guy kidding me? He's such a kid. Then you go again, and at some point they start to take you seriously, and then at some point you actually start to resemble their kid. And sooner or later, at some point they'll give you a chance. And so once you get that chance, you just have to over-deliver, right? And then it's a cycle. So I just thought always there's some value in starting young. I know there's some practical things that people say that, you need to gather experience and so on and so forth. I've also got a strong opinion around that. Just say, go into business. Everything that you need to do, just listen to the market, listen to the customer, listen to the staff members. They'll tell you everything that you need to know.
Yeah, Ken, and we are glad you listened to the market. We are glad that you listened to your customers. So tell us exactly what it is that Cellulant does and the solutions that you provide and the markets where you're operating in. The challenges that you may have faced. I know you're in Malawi where there's FX challenges. I know you're in Zimbabwe where no one ever wants to go. They're not sure of the political climate. You're in Nigeria. You're in, Liberia where there was Ebola. So what gave you confidence to listen to this market and to go and find some solution to their problems? So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think all of those things were really, a lot of our journey and path was shaped by the market. Because you remember from what I said earlier, we started the business with a very simple promise that regular Africans could actually build a world-class business in Africa. And why did we want to be $1 billion business? We figured that, look, okay, if somebody at some point looked at Cellulant and said, these two guys were sort of two regular guys, they didn't go to Ivy League schools, never left the country, fully born and bred, educated in the local system. Bolaji went to Nigeria, went to a university in Nigeria. I went to school in Nakuru. I didn't actually go to school in Nairobi. Actually, when I came to Nairobi, I was a little fascinated that people spoke English really well. So we figured that, look, if we built a $10 million business, you know, if you ask somebody, okay, is that then a successful model that you can actually be young, regular Africans who built a business, no political connections, no corruption, it would be debatable whether it's a successful model, right? Maybe at $100 million, there'd be a richer thief, richer politician, and so on, right? And then there'd be some kind of debate. Maybe the debate would be less, but there'd be some debate. But we figured that $1 billion is no contest, right? There's no debate. Does the model work? Can you do it? Can you do it in Africa? Can you do it with corruption? Can you really succeed? There would be no debate whatsoever. And so that's actually set a fairly powerful incentive. So, men, I mean, you know, Cellulant, Bolaji, and myself, if you ever want to get me upset, is to tell me something can't be done, or to tell me that we can't do it for one reason or another. Just never sits well in my ear and Bolaji's ear. So we're driven, and of course we drove a lot of people crazy, and on our teams, and there's a lot of them here, and they know we drive them crazy. So that was essentially, you could say, the mission of the business. Now, we didn't at that time make any attempt to define what exactly our business was going to be, but we knew we needed to be $1 billion business and so on. So we started off as a music business, right? And it was a very simple model. We published a catalog at the beginning of the over the weekends, listed the top 10 songs, top 20 songs. You sent a text, the system sent you back a song. We charged you $1, and that's it. So 2004, 2005, 2006, we were basically just trying to stay alive. And then in 2006, then we basically got the model right, and we started to grow rapidly. And by 2008, we had grown roughly a $5 million business selling music in Kenya and Nigeria. And so that was a period of relative growth and relative peace. Essentially, all of this time that I spent with landlords, suppliers, and whatever it is sort of just disappeared. And a lot of my time started being spent on, figuring out, if we're going to be $1 billion business, what business lines are we going to be in? There was, of course, already a couple of things that were already set. You know, we knew that it was mobile. We could see it was growing. At that time, we had served about 6 million consumers, unique consumers who had bought our music. So we knew that if you extrapolated that, there was actually sufficient opportunity to grow. But then we were concerned about the business line. We said, look, you know, with the music, we don't sing the songs, so we are a middleman of some sort. And we became concerned that maybe it wasn't possible to actually become a $1 billion middleman in the music business. But then we started looking at the data with all this time that I had, Bolaji had, and we started thinking about where the future was going. Eventually, when we looked at our music business, we realized several things. One is that we had served 6 million customers. They were paying $1. Nobody had a problem. And so the part of the mission became, a critical success factor of our mission became very clear. I said, actually to become a $1 billion business, we need to serve 100 million customers earning $1 per customer per month, right? It became very clear. So since we had served 6 million customers in Kenya and Nigeria, you could see that, to get to 100 million, we need to expand a couple of markets. So that became an imperative that we needed to do. And then we started to look at this $1 per month and then realize one thing, that whereas customers paid us $1 for music, the mobile operators took 80 cents. But despite that, we still had a $5 million business. So we started to wonder, these guys, can we take them out of the equation? And we started to think a little bit about how, if we had this problem, then other people would have this problem. Most probably other people in the future would have the problem. This is how we started to think about being a payments business. And then immediately we started to think a little bit about that. It became very clear that, actually it makes sense to be a payments business. And if we build out a payments business, we'll have a really successful high margin music business. And then we open up this platform to other people that have the same problems. And so when we started this journey, this was sometime in 2006, we started to make some moves in this journey. And it started with a simple call, going out, talking to banks, selling this vision that you could do this. And banks thought we were crazy at the time. And banks would ask us, what? Will Africans, people trust mobile phones? Will they transact on mobile phones? Will never happen. And sometime in 2007, or March 2007, there was a small article in the Nation newspaper. Just say Safaricom launches money transfer service. Very tiny article in an inner page of the newspaper. And on this particular day, I happened to be presenting to some directors of one of the large banks. And I asked them, hey, did you see what Safaricom launched today? And they said, forget about those guys. They don't know much about the money business. And I looked at them in horror, and I just said, are you serious? Because if you knew Safaricom the way I do, and they came anywhere remotely close to the business I do, I'd want to pay a lot of attention because they execute well. And so 1 year later, then M-Pesa sort of got traction. And all of a sudden, banks stopped asking us these silly questions. And then they started calling. No, they could never remember our name. They say, there are those young guys, Cellulant something. They seem to have been talking about this stuff. Call those guys. And so at this point, we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And then in this place, I was like a madman, you know. So I used to just go into the office. I had one single marching order. It's just sign up as many banks as you can, right? We have a short window. We have a nice window in the market. Sign up as many banks as we can. And that's what we did. And some of our early customers were the multinational banks, Barclays, Standard Chartered, and so on. And these banks then basically had operations in other markets. And we went with them into the other markets. We set up operations. And then at one point, I would walk up into the office and find some guy who was a product manager, call them in the room. I said, hey, we need to get something going in Zambia. Do you want to go to Zambia and go and run the business there? And if they were married and they said yes, I said, fine, let's have dinner with you and your husband, whatever it is. And we have dinner. They both seemed excited. I sent them to Zambia with simple matching orders. We can afford your salary for 3 months after that, get the customer to market, figure out how to basically support yourself in the market, stay within the stuff, don't bribe, don't do this, whatever it is, just and build as a bloody business, right? And so we did this, and in a couple of years, we essentially expanded our footprint to 13 countries. This is how we went into 13 countries. Mm-hmm. So it was very organic, but guided by a very singular and timeless mission, which kind of had set some sort of boundaries about the type of business, and the hunger to succeed, you could say.
Indeed. And people are your biggest resources. I mean, building a business, you have to have a very strong management team. You also have to build them from somewhere. So maybe just talk about what you're doing to build a strong caliber of good potential, employees that would come into Cellulant, and particularly what you're doing for the younger students.
Yeah, that's a good question, I think, and it's really central to our progress. I would say it's essentially a secret weapon to why we are where we are, and will continue to be really a competitive advantage for us into the future. And I think we were talking earlier, and I was telling you that now I believe that for me to succeed, I generally need to spend 80% of my time with people. And it started early, it was a philosophy. So my sense is that entrepreneurship is a team sport. So the first 2 employees of Cellulant was myself and Bolaji. And team sport in every sense. We shared everything. We shared the business 50-50, despite the fact that he put all of the money. Every single cent that we needed to pay early, we shared 50-50, right? I mean, it was always a shared understanding that, okay, you put the money, but I'm putting time, taking risk. Nobody ever sat down to say, hey, maybe you got a nice, and I had relatives actually would be murmuring and just saying, that guy is conning you. So you're doing all the hard work, you're taking all the risks, and then you guys own the business 50-50. I say, well, fine, but he's buying my diapers too, right? So that's the thing. And then we got the the third employee, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth. And at that time, some of these employees started to basically work without pay. So those are not employees, those are partners, right? They have come at a certain pace in the journey, but they are partners for all intents and purposes, because they've brought the only thing that they've got, which is their talent, their career prospects and stuff to the party. So for me, from a people philosophy point of view, it's just deeply philosophical that you treat them as partners, they bring everything to the table. That's just it. And because they are really skilled, you went for the best in the first place, then very early, you just have a better team than the other guy, right? You have a much more committed team than the other guy. And so in the beginning, I think it was always hand-to-hand combat. And when I found good guys, boy, I stalked them everywhere. I mean, if I followed the trail, I found that the wife was the influencer, I'd want to have lunch with both of them. I mean, it's like I was relentless about finding good people. It's like, without good, and I never settled second best. If somebody became the best, I was told, that guy, there's second to none. Then I just said, then we just must have that guy. So I think early on, that was easy because, you're basically hiring a handful of guys. You can interview them, you can stalk them, and so on. As the business then sort of expanded in terms of number of people, then you needed a much more structured way to interpret this philosophy, right? But I was still very hands-on as far as people is concerned, and generally I've been very hands-on over time. I think when we are just about 25 to 50 people, all of the key people decisions I made, and look, it's not just about finding the guys, but once they were in the business, really paying attention to their growth needs, right? It's like looking at what are their aspirations, where are they going, and so on and so forth. And I find that, and that's always done eyeball to eyeball, right? It's not like stuff. It's always one-to-one conversations. It's in the office, out of the office, and stuff like that. And not having I'm not a social guy, so I've never sort of gone out and drunk beer with my team members, right? I'm just not wired that way. But I have a very good understanding of what their needs are and where they want to go. Because I figure that it's always very simple. It's my job as find the best guys, put them in the team, and then just worry about making sure that we are fulfilling their growth ambition in terms of giving them opportunity and so on. And some of those things include very specific interventions, and they are always, eyeball to eyeball. I always give a good example of one of our one of my senior colleagues now, who heads strategy. So he joined us when he was in his second year in campus, and he was studying commerce. He joined in the finance team, and typically I like to manage and I like to engage teams always one or two levels below. So if we're working on a project, there is a team that's working on it. I normally like to have one-on-one time with the team leader, but I like to have a lot of exposure to the teams, just sitting with the teams, listening to them, how they're thinking about problems and engaging, because that's, and so in this session I had identified this guy, and I identified that, okay, this guy has a little bit higher potential than his boss. And then I figured so I started to keep an eye on him because I didn't want his boss to stifle him. So I started to micromanage that relationship in a sense. As life would have it, the boss left at some point. And so I sat with this kid, and I looked at him and I said, I've been watching you for a while. I think you can do the job. You can get the job done, but you're still in school. I said, so I want you to think about two things, right? So promise me that you're going to maintain their grades, and the job you're not gonna drop the ball on the job. If you think you can do that, let's meet tomorrow. Look me in the eye, tell me you can do it, give me a plan that makes sense, and if it makes sense, then I will not hire another head of finance. And he did, and he gave me a plan, and it made sense. And so he continued and eventually became the head of finance, finished his school, and he was head of finance. And during his tenure, we basically incurred a tax liability. At the time, it was about $400,000, about 40 million bob, right? At a time when that for the country, that was equivalent to pretty much a year's turnover for the country. So I remember then having a chat with this guy, and just asked him, you've lost us a lot of money. And so I asked him, okay, so how much do you think your family invested in all of your education until university? And he looked at me a little bit surprised. And no, I said, how much? Let's do the math. And he did. I said, supposing you went to Harvard for your master's degree, how much would that be? And then I said, and supposing then you went to MIT for a PhD, how much would that be? And I looked at him and I said, well, boss, this 40 million, Bob, is school fees. So I've paid more school fees than all of your village will ever pay for you. So now what you're going to do, you're not going to stay on this job. I'm going to send you to Zambia. And now go to Zambia and give me a freaking return for my school fees. And I said, and a couple of weeks I shipped into Zambia. And so now, when I looked into this guy's eyes and this thing, I could see from his eyes that he was going to be a good investment. He was never, ever going to lose us any money from there on. And later on, talking to, even as the business grew, I always found that, some of the things that most people loved about Cellulant is that they say that it's a very forgiving environment, that typically you lose money and we have a tough conversation, but you still stay in the team. And so typically people get fired for crossing culture lines. If you're not treating your team well, not respectful and so on, you get fired quickly. But trying out something, making a mess and so on and so forth, you still get forgiven as long as you've learned. So the process of people, it's first a philosophy of really treasuring people. Yeah. You can't treasure them if you don't share the dream, you don't share the mission, you don't share opportunities. Yes. And in our case with Bolaji, don't share the company, right? I mean, Bolaji and I started the company, we owned the company 50-50. And then immediately we started to build a team, we started to cut the company up, just divvy it out. Mm-hmm. And I always remember that every conversation I had with the Bolaji, giving equity to a staff member always lasted about 3 minutes. It's like I'd go to Bolaji and say, this guy now, I think, we've been talking about this stuff, we need to make it happen. Yeah, so what percent, 5%, 10%, yeah, 12, yeah, done. And that's it. And so it's sharing, and it's sharing, it's being open and stuff like that. And in the end, I find that people, so basically that's a DNA, right? It's a philosophy, you've got to believe in it, and that sort of thing. And I think if you do, then when you start to build your systems around people, and it's like now, people's systems are still very immature. I don't think we recruit well yet. Our development model for growing people is still sink or swim, terrible way to grow people and stuff like that. But what I find is that because of a deep-seated DNA that believes in people, it begins to attract people of a certain kind. But even now when we begin to think about building our recruitment systems and so on, we are very clear that we want to build these processes around a DNA that identifies the best, like just goes for the best. Hires people that value other people. A process that intentionally manages people's growth path. So I hate words like performance management systems, right? Because, I mean, yeah, people need to deliver, but it doesn't make sense. Performance management, if you manage people's growth, they will perform, right? I mean, if you give them the opportunities that excite them most, make it very clear what aspirations we want to support them and stuff like that, the results tend to take care of themselves. And I think, and invest in their growth without strings attached. So I'm always fighting with HR, saying, okay, so we want to send this guy for training, he needs to sign a bonding contract. I say, why on earth would we want to do that? If you want to send him to the US for school, send him to the US for school, right? I mean, why do you want to hold him onto him for 2 years? He might go and discover that actually this is not the opportunity for them. And typically what happens, so what we see at Cellulant, we have a lot of returnees, and we welcome them a lot. So people work at Cellulant 4 years, go out, rise up their ranks, and then after 3 years, 4 years, they come back. And when you meet them, they're always saying, so I've got 1 or 2 years to do, then I'll come back home. And I say, well, great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And Ken, you're working with the African Leadership University to build talent. As you're saying, there's a certain caliber of persons that you want to build right from the education institution. I think that's a fantastic thing you're trying to do. Maybe just speak a little bit to that and share with us what you're doing to hone this talent right from the university level.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think as we began to kind of think a little bit about how to build the systems that support our people to grow, I look at several things, so there's the systems for how you hire and you identify, and then how you grow them. So in how we grow them, what we've done is we said, look, okay, let's look at, from the beginning, how do we start to grow people? And what we realize is that then it makes a lot of sense, and when we listen to how ALU thinks about education, we say then it's actually very powerful to actually identify talent from their first year in university. Now that's a really long-term view. I mean, because, and then so we partnered with the university, so we paid school fees of, I think now we have a cohort of 9. It was our intention to double that cohort every year. We haven't followed through very well, but we'll go back and get our act together in that area. But so that was the design of that program was basically to make sure that the entry-level guys that come into Cellulant, basically we have had a lot of interaction time. We've chosen the best, and throughout their school they spend about 3 months with us. And so that we know them, they know the business, and so on and so forth. So so those guys will come into Cellulant full time in 2019. Yeah. So we just thought that it made a lot of sense to actually think a little bit about the pipeline and to bring people that were sort of built to work at Cellulant from very early on. Mm-hmm. So it's a development program, one of the 3 that we have. So there's an entry level. It looks at those guys there. Then there is a middle level development program and so on. So what we're trying to do with this program is become very intentional about identifying, engaging, and supporting people to grow as a fundamental backbone of the business, right? Because what we know is that we actually want to build our competitive advantage based on people. Yes. And this is how I look at it. I say, well, if you want to build a $1 billion business, maybe the total staff count will have about 1,000 people. Now we know that the skill pool for a technology business that's operating at that size is going to be few people. We know that, right? Everybody knows that. Everybody that runs a business knows it's increasingly difficult to identify people. We just think that, look, it's very simple. If we have 1,000 of the best people in the different fields that can work in a technology company, we will starve the competition of talent. That's just the thing. So it's good to develop people. I think it's a fundamental, at least thesis in my strategy. And then we want to take a long-term view. So by the time that we've actually got this going and settled, we've got a couple of years lead time. And because we invest in them very early, what I've seen is that, of course, everything happens, whatever it is. I don't expect if we take 10 through this program, if we go out and systematically train another 10 in the middle layer and our senior leaders, of course, I mean, maybe 2 or 3 will really still stay with us for the long term. It's inevitable that 4 or 5 will find other stuff and whatever it is. But what we've seen is that when people leave us, they go to Safaricom. People leave us, they go to the banks. If we've trained them really well, they rise to the top. That's just what happens. And so increasingly, and we've been doing this for a while, so increasingly what I'm beginning to see, I'm beginning to run into boardrooms where, so we are doing a partnership with someone and it's all Cellulant people. Fantastic. They are not all on my payroll, but they work for our mission. How cool is that? Why would I? So I mean, it really makes sense to just execute and follow through on that strategy. And so So it's a way of life, it's a thinking, at least Cellulant is a way of life and thinking. And as long as it's around us, I think it's going to be good for us. That's how we look at people.
Amazing. I was pleasantly surprised actually when I walked into your offices, Ken, today, and I saw a huge complement of women. I was so proud of you. How many women are you employing, and what is your mission, and why women as workers? Because tech is a space where a lot of men are the founders and co-founders. We don't see so many women there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, to be quite honest, until you asked the question, I've never really thought about it, and I'm embarrassed, of course. I mean, there's a huge conversation around gender stuff. I think we have about 338 people in 13 markets. I think about 122 women. And so that's, I think in most of the countries about 38% of the guys are women. And now as I was thinking about the ratio, I don't know whether that's good or bad. However, what I see is that our stars are women. So I always say today, if so there is a 50% chance that today, if I step down from being CEO, my successor will be a woman. There's no in the management team. There's very high chance that could be the case. So that I don't, at least consciously, we don't have a gender program. In the management team, there is 6 out of in our senior team, 6 out of 14 women. I think at the end of the year that number could be 9 or so. I think we are recruiting, and I see some of the top performers in the incoming pipeline are women. Not because we are looking specifically for women, they're just the best in the pile for those particular roles.
Amazing. I think, as you said, there's going to be a lot of inclusivity, and as you're seeking the best talent, I think you find it in women. And I'm not saying this because I'm a woman, but I think women indeed bring a lot to the table, even on the governance side. So let me shift you back now to very exciting times right now in Cellulant. Your initial capital raise, and you mentioned, something about that slightly earlier, was $1.5 million when you initially took on venture capital investment. However, everyone knows in this room that Ken has raised $47.5 million, a whopping $47.5 million. So Ken, how did that journey begin, and what made you comfortable speaking to investors and getting them convinced to actually put in that scale of capital into your business?
Yeah, I mean, it all sounds well scripted, isn't it? Right? Like, that sort of thing. But so we raised the 1.5 in our first investment. You could call it Series A. This was in 2011. 2014, we raised an additional $6 million from 2 institutional investors. The current round is a participation of our existing investors and some new investors. TPG and the Rice Fund, TPG and Rice Fund are well known. They are a seasoned technology investor in different sectors and with a lot of experience in technology. So I'll talk a little bit about the journey of fundraising. That has not always been very easy. It's like as a founder. Every moment that we have had institutional investors, it was always a very difficult time for me because there's all these valuations that you read about, magazines and so on and so forth, and then somehow the real world is that's not the valuations you're looking at. So there's always a disconnect between at least the founder expectation, your own opinion of what the business is worth, and the reality in the market. That's always been a journey, and I think in every one of the rounds, it's always been one of the most sort of difficult and excruciating things for me as well. But in the end, you listen a lot, you look at stuff and whatever it is, and have successively made peace with that journey as we went along. So I think that was always the thing. the raising the funds themselves, the transaction process and so on has always been a fantastic learning experience because so you talk to a lot of investors. Every part of your business is questioned, is debated, is discussed in detail and so on. So it's always been a fairly refreshing process in getting you to figure out the business very differently. The last fundraising round, as big as it is, was also very challenging. So I started the journey about 24 months ago. I didn't expect that it was going to take that long. And to be quite honest, it was a bit of naivete. It was a combination of a bit of naivete and a bit of cockiness a bit, right? Because we'd been in business for a long time. We have some of the best customers in the business. The payment space itself is very hot. And at least in terms of name recognition, we always sort of, you talk about payments, you know, our name comes up. So I quite frankly didn't expect that it was going to take long. And so my sense was that it was going to take about 6 months. And so, but then I knew that I wanted to be, you know, the previous rounds we had raised them almost organically. You know, you ran into some investors, you caught for a long period of time, you kind of like each other, and then the timing is not right. And then at some point, you know, the right timing comes and you go and say, hey guys, we've been talking for a while, I think we are right. And then you get in and start discussing the transaction, the deal terms and so on. This particular one, we knew that, you know, we wanted to raise a large round of capital. It wasn't as large as it ended up being. And so I wanted to be structured. So we identified 60 investors and then got onto the road and basically just reached out, did a pitch deck and so on, and sent it out. And basically then the no started to come. No, it's like no. Yeah, there was always one.
Out of the 60, only one came.
In the end, 60 investors, one term sheet. And you know, so I talked to some investors who say, well, I've got 6 term sheets. And I say, how do you do that? You know, it's like, I don't understand it. But that journey taught me a couple of things. One is that, okay, so there were some structural things that were concerns around our business. One is as a payments business in Africa and the type of payment business we've evolved, we generally have more moving pieces than a payments business in another part of the world, right? And typically, sadly, the kind of investment round that made our last round, those types of investors are not local investors. That's just the reality. I mean, you are raising $30 million and whatever it is and things like this, those are not local investors. So there were essentially London-based, Joburg-based, and US-based investors. So our business was a little more complex than they'd been accustomed, right? I think what I came to learn is that investors figure out is that you take a business model, it's very simple, you throw capital at it and you out-execute everybody else. The payments in Africa is a little bit more nuanced than that. So our business ends up being operationally much more complex than typically they've been accustomed to. So very early, we were just not able to, we were not very articulate in explaining that fact and bringing that context. So investors basically, some very fairly good investors, they love the management team, dropped out because of that complexity. A couple of the guys just dropped off through what I call just bad storytelling. So I went into the fundraising round, relatively okay storyteller, but it wasn't good enough because, yeah, it's just after 400 presentation, it wasn't always this good at the beginning, right? And quite frankly, this is my belief. I lost a hell of a lot of investors. And I think that I also left some value on the table because of the storytelling. I tend to think that if I went back to the same 60 today, 400 presentations later, I'd basically maybe close around 50% higher valuation and maybe 6 term sheets.
Maybe the 60 will come back to us.
Yeah, and so. And I'm a better storyteller than the average Kenyan. So a lot of the Kenyan entrepreneurs, Our education system, man, just did not train us to tell the story, you know, and it costs real value, right? I mean, just articulating yourself and stuff like that is like real value on the table. It's not a joke. And yes, and 400 presentations, so it was rigorous in terms of time. Yeah, so I was practically out of the business for 24 months. So if I hadn't built a good team, our business would have stopped growing. And what happens in the fundraising round? You meet an investor, they say, so great, how are you tracking on your numbers? And they look at your the commitments that you made in the last presentation, and a lot of the good ones have elephant memories, they remember. So if you're out on the road for too long, you haven't prepared yourself, you haven't built a good team, and then what happens? The business, and because you're away, you're your CFO and so on. And if the business starts to falter, you almost will not raise funds.
Actually, you lose value. And this is something that entrepreneurs go through a lot, because when you're out fundraising and you didn't build the team, you find that your revenues dip. And that sometimes, exactly. And the being on the road can be a long journey. And as you're saying, yours was 24 months. And here you are, you had built a business, you are, in all these African countries and had revenue. And your type of investor, is someone who is used to a different type of market, different type of businesses. They're used to, these businesses that, when they exit will list in the in the New York Stock Exchange. I'm still thinking Nairobi. They'll list in the global stock exchanges and things like that. So what got them comfortable with you doing payments business in Africa, especially because of that fear of money laundering, money moving around and people not being very sure about all those regulatory regimes and things like that. So what really got them confident, and what really sealed the deal for you also?
Yeah, well, actually, I'd be guessing. I mean, it's a hypothesis. This is what I think. So it was a combination of very many things. One is just I think we were on the road for long enough for first the story and the clarity of the stuff to really to get it sharp. Yeah, because you'd listen to the other guy who said no. I'd sit with them. I'd try to understand what exactly didn't work, and then I'd go out and reflect a lot on those things, and just you think through it, look at it better, and so on. So part of the stuff was just much more sharper storytelling, understanding what the problems were, and basically being able to provide context for that. I think that was a very key. I think that was one of them. And because the pack that closed the stuff came on the tail end. There are people that essentially we had engaged for a while, and then began to re-engage again on the tail end after sort of a lot of no's in between. I think the second thing is that we got admitted into the Endeavor Network. The Endeavor Network is this network of high-impact entrepreneurs. And basically for a lot of investors that are not in the market, who had been familiar with our network, it was in some kind of endorsement. It was because it's a very rigorous process to go through. Was kind of something that was very familiar. They talk about investors having liking certain patterns of familiarity and stuff, right? So I think we basically were just part of a network whose standards and track record was known. And then I think the third thing has got something to do with the investors themselves. I think there's always a timing, right? And I think for them it was the right time. They had a partner that understood Africa well, understood payments well in Africa. And I think just at the tail end of the stuff also, it's possible that their timing must have aligned, right? And yeah, so it was a combination of some learning, me getting better, us getting better. It was a combination of that the business actually had stayed very consistent across the time as they kept watching the business. And luck, some of the other things I can't control. Look at our business now into 2023. So we think that our mission says we need to get to become the #1 payments business by 2023. To do that, we need to have roughly 100 million. To do that, we think we need to be a $1 billion business, right? And this is how we look at it. M-Pesa in the payment space, a wider payment space, and there are different types of payment businesses. And the way we look at the payment space is there is M-Pesa, there is Cellulant, there is the mobile money operator, other mobile money operators in other countries, there's the switches and so on. All of these guys operate in the payment space. So today, the number one by size, by revenue size, is M-Pesa. I think last financial report is $660 million business. So if you rank things that way, Cellulant is number 15, I think. So if we want to be number one, we think that, or at the top of the game, we need to be $1 billion business. To be $1 billion business, we need about 100 million customers by earning $1 per customer per month. Today, we have roughly about 1.5 million monthly active customers. We've built the infrastructure into 120 million customers. But monthly active customers will basically sort of transact on our network in a given month, roughly about 1.5 million. And that number is growing. So that's ideally the stuff. So how are we going to get there? I think that organically, we have a path to, let's say, $100 million by 2021, 2022, 2023, right? So if we basically keep doing what we're doing, we accelerate our growth a little bit faster, we get there. But that's a boring job. It's not my mission. I'm always joking with one of my directors. I said, the day that you guys in the board stop me from doing the things that tilt that trajectory is the day that I go, because that job won't be exciting for me. I think there's somebody else in the team actually who can deliver that growth. Let us give them an opportunity to grow and so on. And so how do we tilt that trajectory? So I think today we have enough opportunities, the same products, same customers, and so on. Growing utilization within our current network can take us to, I think we can tilt our trajectory to about 300 million or so in the same time frame. Now, how quickly we grow will be determined by really what we do with our people. So today, the only barrier to Cellulant's growth is how many people we can put in front of a customer, right? That's just, so the market size, the headroom for the market is there. M-Pesa is a $600 million business only in Kenya. If you look at a market like Nigeria, there's no M-Pesa, nothing. No mobile money, nothing. It's a market 5 times, 6 times the size of Kenya. This year, it will become our largest market. And this year will most probably become the largest mobile payments company in Nigeria. So if you look at it in that way, then we have enough room to grow to maybe $200, $300 million business, same time frame. I don't know what the pathway looks like between 300 and a billion in the same time frame. So it's very possible that we could pursue acquisitions and so on and so forth. I have a strong hunch that, I think that's what we are going to do. And if we are going to do that, I think that the way that the market is that there's about, let's say, 150 payment companies in Africa. So there's the top 15. The top 15 make almost 95% of the $2 billion of revenue that's generated by the payments business today. So there's a lot of fragmentation in the market. I think there's an opportunity to consolidate because I believe that only the large, highly integrated platforms will succeed at scale. And we think that there's a big opportunity to buy them. So it's possible that in 2020 I might get back on the road to raise a Series D to basically fund acquisitions after we've kind of secured our path to $200, $300 million in the same time frame. So that's how I see the future. It's very possible that some of my board members will be, if they listen to this podcast, they'll be hearing this for the first time.
Sorry.
So it's fresh off the oven. So why did we wait too long to raise funds in 2011? It's because before then we were not investable. right, I mean, we had a lot of housekeeping to do. Because so we spent 3 years trying to just survive, then settled into the music business. The music business was very profitable, by the way. And then we started to change the business model. So in a sense, before then, we were generally not investable. We were not ready for an institutional investor, business model-wise. The second question, which was why $1 billion? Quite frankly, there was no science to it. We just literally just plucked the number from the sky, right? But it actually defined, at least in our minds, just a significant measure of such scale that you couldn't debate with the existence of what we believed, which is that you could actually solve Africa's problems at scale, that it could be done in our lifetime, and so on and so forth. So just at $1 billion, it just felt at that, and what now, looking back in hindsight, I see that if I extrapolate, and we just did this exercise now, just a few days ago, and just saying, okay, what is Cellulant going to be? If you unpack Cellulant at $1 billion, what does the business look like? So today, we are a payments business, but we are a very different payment business from any other. We are, in a sense, a combination of M-Pesa, PayPal, Stripe, and it's a really diverse business model. Our business in Nigeria is very different from our business in Kenya. But in the end, all of these business models will converge. And so if you unpack Cellulant into the future, today what are we doing? So we're powering everything from payments for Kenya Airways. You go online, you book a ticket, and we power that. You open your mobile banking app, we power that. In Nigeria, a lot of the large agricultural companies are sort of buying their produce off our platform, right? Because we built the underlying payment platform that pays everyone in the agriculture sector. And so people have figured out actually that because we've got this extensive mapping of all of the farmers and everything they grow, we can come and order. So like a rice miller can come and use our marketplace to actually order rice. So if you think about the breadth of that business, we kind of distill this thing that at $1 billion, we will basically 1.2 billion meals will be bought off our platform, our marketplace, agriculture marketplace. Roughly 1 in 10 Africans will pay on our platform, and so on. And those things are important, right? Because if we look at, for instance, the transformational nature of what we did in Nigeria, basically we literally put a payment platform in place that had 20 million farmers, no identity, no bank account, did not exist in the economic system, had $700 of income a year, and basically transformed that to about $1,800 in 3 years, right? So when you think a little bit about $1 billion and you unpack it, then it's really everything that we always wanted to do, everything we complained about, you could see then that actually we'll be making a real difference. So when I begin to think a little bit about that, it really gives me a lot of energy to continue doing what I'm doing, you know. So I've been at this journey for 15 years. I've really got a lot. I'm physically exhausted because of the fundraising, so I'm going to go and leave in a week or so. But I'm mentally energized. I'm like, I just have such renewed energy for the vision and the mission of the business, because the more you unpack this stuff, the more it becomes clear how transformational we're going to be. And it's just it is too important an opportunity for me to sleep on the job. So that keeps me focused every day. And your last question?
What was the last question from the lead?
The trends in the sector that you're seeing?
In the payment sector. Yeah, so I think the sector will continue to grow. I think there's huge headroom for growth. I think that's number one. Regulation will continue to support the growth of the sector, right? Of course, regulation is not simplistically saying, look, do regulators support Bitcoin or not? But regulation in the sense that regulators are pushing towards financial inclusion and digitization, right? And those things support payments. So the regulatory direction across every country we are in supports the growth of the sector. I think the sector is going to get more competitive, and it's highly fragmented, so it's basically competitors. So today, I would say we have almost like 30 different competitors who all look different from each other, right? So so it will continue to be a very fragmented space because of the size of the opportunity. In the foreseeable future, there is enough opportunity for everybody. I think so 5 to 7 years, there's going to be maybe a couple of billion-dollar payment businesses, a handful of $100 million payment businesses, tens of $10 million plus businesses, and lots of $1 million, $2 million plus businesses, right? So there's enough room for everybody. Beyond that, you're going to have to consolidate at scale to survive. I think that's a critical trend. Consumers are continuing to demand digitization. So in most places, you build something, you go and sell it to the consumer. In the digital space and in payments, it's consumers that are demanding these services. So banks that are generally slow are forced to come to the table. Insurance companies are forced to innovate because customers are saying, well, you know, I can do everything else digitally. I mean, why the bloody hell do you need me to sign these forms? I mean, digitize, right? So all of the positive signs will drive digitization. Of course, the normal challenges, we are operating across countries, currency is an issue. Talent is an issue. You need to be very intentional about your talent and so on. And then running a business is always a problem, right? It's like sooner or later something hits you that you didn't see. That's just the nature of business. I don't think it's unique to payments only, but it's just the nature of the business. So that's a trend. But I'm sure there are negative trends, but you know, look, I'm an optimist. So I see only the positive trends.